Hello, my name is Raymond Carr, and I am a puppeteer and independent filmmaking director. I work with the Jim Henson Company quite a bit. I'm based in Atlanta. I've been doing this for just about 20 years now, and mostly in the Atlanta area, but I've traveled all over the world and working with a lot of different production companies everywhere. And yeah, in addition to being a filmmaker and a puppeteer, I also production design commercials as well. And I've been working with the Jim Henson Company for about 10 years now, where I do various roles in all the different productions they have, including their puppet improv show called Puppet Up, which is coming out relatively soon. So that's me.
Welcome to Scratch, Claw, Push, a podcast about artists clawing out a place for themselves in the world. I'm Billy Joe Cones.
And I'm Brendan Duke. Let's go.
Well, it's awesome to meet you because, I just have to say I have been puppet curious for a long time. And I've done a little puppeteering. Like I got to puppeteer for a theater production I was in. A 3 foot tall, brain just went dead, marionette, once. And so that was super fun. I love puppets and clowns, which most people are creeped out by. I'm like, bring on the puppets and clowns, please. So how did you end up getting into puppeteering in the first place?
Yeah, it's a weird story. But I guess since we have some time, I'll get into the real. I usually kind of either will lie or make up something that's even more weird, and then they believe it. But I was homeschooled by church clowns.
Now I want to know the lies too.
No, that's the truth. No, the lie is I usually say I lost a bet or something like that. But yeah, no, my parents were clowns. And we traveled around the country doing clowning stuff, and my brother and I would do puppets in the background, and we would travel to schools and churches. And we got our start in a mega church. So the church I grew up in had 15,000 members. And then the church I moved to Atlanta to with my family when I was in high school had 25,000 members. So we were used to performing in front of large audiences. From there, that kind of, because I was homeschooled, I was very much an introvert and just didn't like to be in front of people at all. I was a borderline agoraphobic. But then I started doing puppetry, and that kind of broke me out of my shell. And I was always a creative person, but it allowed me to have that creative outlet. And then when we moved to Atlanta, I got involved with the Center for Puppetry Arts, which is the country's largest puppetry theater and museum. They have the largest collection of Muppets and Jim Henson puppets anywhere in the world. And yeah, I started doing my own pieces there. I became a resident puppeteer there. I directed some short pieces in their experimental puppetry theater program. I did pretty much everything there is to do in that area. So at the same time, this was early in the early aughts, so technology and independent film was becoming more accessible, just the way that cameras were being created. So I got involved in the indie film scene here in Atlanta, and I became the puppet guy. So all of my movies had some sort of creature effect or monster or puppet in it, and that kind of set me apart from some of the other indie filmmakers at the time. So and then from there, I just kind of started building a brand and got an agent and started doing more work internationally as well. So.
Wow, that's a lot. I mean, I remember, I think, if I'm not mistaken, you kind of used to run with the Zombie Cat crew back in the day.
Yeah.
Were you involved with them at all? I remember, Molly Coffee and that crew. Cause I remember when I first started getting into it, doing short films and stuff in Atlanta, there was the 48-hour film festival that came through every year. And I remember Zombie Cat was one of the crews we were always up against with the various teams I went in, and y'all always put out whether it was there was various degrees of how well you pull it off, but it was always interesting stuff, and it was usually better than a lot of the other stuff that was in the festival. So
Yeah,
from what I
Molly
remember.
Coffee. Yeah. Molly Coffee is still one of my dearest friends. She is also a production designer in town and independent filmmaker. She founded a company called Film Impact Georgia, which is a grant-based um, company, organization, nonprofit that helps support independent filmmakers in Atlanta. So they give out a $5,000 grant to independent films. They do it, I believe, twice a year. And so I was one of the founding board members on that. Molly and I had a studio space at the Metropolitan Lofts for almost a decade, just building all kinds of crazy things and for film and television, and also for our own passion projects. So yeah, that was I was really happy to connect to like-minded people. And like I said, we kind of came in at a great time when, this is right around the time the tax incentives was first starting in Atlanta. So people were coming into Atlanta really excited about making stuff. And we kind of hopped on that bandwagon and kept going.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember it too. Like, we've actually had Chuck Thomas on the show, and we're also scheduled to be talking to Hannah Fearman soon. So a little heads up for the crowd. But I mean, yeah, like that. And I remember like they would take pictures from that group back in the day, and there was all this cool stuff in the background. I'm assuming was probably some of your work, like dinosaur stuff and like random puppets and.
Yeah, we had a lot of the large scale puppets were mine, and a lot of those puppets in general were mine. But yeah, that was Zombie Cat Studios, so I was one of the members of that collective as well.
So tell us about like so going from there, how did you become affiliated or like involved with like Jim Henson's company?
Right. So I made a film. Actually, I made a film in, I guess it was around 2012, with Heather Henson, Jim Henson's youngest daughter, called Hitori. She has an organization that finances and distributes short films that feature puppets. That's kind of been her passion and her way to kind of carry on her father's legacy, handmade puppet dreams, and they're still around today. So I pitched to them an idea that I had for a film, and they liked it and they financed it. And so that's my first connection with the Henson family. And they're all they have their own, there's 4 Henson kids that are still alive, and they all have their own different ways that they help carry on their father's legacy. So Heather's handmade puppet dream, that was kind of her own thing. And then there was a workshop being held at the Jim Henson Company in Hollywood, and it just happened that I had some time and I was able to take off from a production. Actually, I was actually working for Molly Coffee at the time as her art director. She was production designing a show called The Carbonaro Effect, which is this hidden camera reality TV show that features a bunch of magic. So we were building a bunch of like magic props.
I used to work at True TV, so I'm very familiar with that show.
Okay, yeah,
Where was that show on?
It was True TV.
It's True TV, one of Turner's networks.
Okay.
Yeah,
I don't think I ever saw that one.
It's a fun. It's like a candid camera style show, except they're all magic tricks. And so yeah, we were the team that for their Atlanta unit, we built most of the props and sceneries and stuff like that for that show. So yeah, they kind of had this open casting call, and they about, from what I understand, about 300 some odd people submitted like their reel and their resume, and about 20 of us got selected to participate in this 9-week workshop. And so I got myself out to LA, and because I'm originally from the West Coast, it was a little easier for me to just live out there. I still had family and friends out there and stuff like that. So I did a lot of couch surfing for a couple of weeks. And, they teach I'd been a puppeteer obviously for years at that point, but they really are about the craft and perfecting it, and specifically the way that the Henson company does it. So it was more so to learn about how they do it. In addition to that, there was a lot of improv that they were developing because they were trying to flesh out their cast of improvisers, improv puppeteers. So yeah, I did about 9 weeks of that workshops, and then from there was a casting call for a show called Splash and Bubbles, which is on PBS. I think it's now on Netflix, but it utilizes their what they call the digital puppetry system. So this is this interface that feels like puppetry, but it basically creates CG characters. So there's this little mechanical glove that goes over your hand, and you move it around, and it operates the mouth of the puppet. And then there's a joystick on the other side, and it operates the other facial features of the joystick. And then there's all these toggles on the individual fingers on the joystick, as well as a piece that goes over your thumb that moves the eyes around. And then there's a series of foot pedals as well. And that's just to operate the face of the puppet. And then there's somebody standing on a motion capture volume, which is like a floor that you stand on with a bunch of infrared cameras all around you. And, they have the ping pong balls all over their bodies. And so that operates the body of the character. And then there's these virtual cameras that fly around, that there are people off to the side who are operating these joysticks that move these digital cameras around. So it basically means that we were shooting a 12-minute episode, one 12-minute episode a day. We were able to just pump out this like CG animation, high quality CG animation in pretty fast real time. And this is they refer to it as the Henson digital puppetry system, but they also refer to it as a Waldo system. If there's any puppet nerds out there, they'll remember there's a character called Waldo who's in the Muppet 3D at Disney World. Who's this 3D character that flies around and whatever. That was one of the last things that Jim did before he died in 1990. So that was 30 years ago, and he was still innovating this kind of technology. And these interactive rigs are the same rigs that they use for their animatronic characters. So this is the same technology that they use for the original Ninja Turtles movie, the Dinosaur television series, if you remember that. All of that basically use the same interface that we use for these cartoons that we created. So because we did about 40 episodes of that. I kind of became good at that process, and then I was able to jump in to do some of the other animatronic stuff whenever they had that kind of system. And it's a specialized system. They oftentimes call me up to help them out with that.
It sounds like you're like a kid who loves candy, and then suddenly, Willy Wonka invites you into his shop.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pretty special place, especially if anyone's in Hollywood. You could drive by it anytime, and it's very gated. But it's the old Charlie Chaplin studio, actually. So it's over 100 years old, and you can still see Charlie Chaplin's footprints in the concrete, and it has a lot of history in there. It's the soundstage that we shoot on is where they shot the original Superman movie back in the 40s. TV series. It's where they even shot the
George Reeves.
Yeah. This is where they also shot stuff like Soul Train back in the 70s and 80s. I know. They also have a recording studio, which is the old A&M recording studio, and they still use it. So there's a lot of celebrities that come in, Paul McCartney and Justin Timberlake, all these folks you might see on the soundstage in the recording studio. It's also where they shot the We Are the World song and music video, if you remember that. So that same sound studio is where we record our songs on that too. So yeah, the Henson Company and that lot specifically is a really special place.
So I want to go back further, because we skipped a lot of your life from like the homeschooled by puppeteering clowns. Is that what you said?
Yeah, church clowns, but sure. I mean, yeah.
Church clowns. Okay. Homeschooled by church clowns to working at Jim Henson. But did you, coming from that background, did you always know that that was what you wanted to do? Was there like, how people say, I want to run away with the circus. And then like circus kids are like, I want to run away and become a CEO or whatever, right? Like, did you ever have thoughts about doing something different, or did you always know this is what you wanted to be doing?
I mean, I constantly have thoughts about doing something different. But I think I wanted to tell stories. It's really hard to really pinpoint any kind of, specific desires, especially when I was younger. I think, people who are creative and have a desire to be creative, they don't always know, especially growing up in the 80s and 90s, they don't always know how things are created or how you could even get there. It's a little easier now just because there's so many behind the scenes videos that you can find on TikTok and Instagram and all that kind of stuff. So it's not that foreign to be exposed to how the sausage is made in any kind of industry. But I just didn't have that kind of perspective. And I certainly didn't know anybody in that field. I mean, I grew up in Southern California, relatively close to the epicenter of, entertainment in the world. And I didn't know anybody in the entertainment industry. So it really was hard for me to imagine my life doing that. And I don't think I really afforded myself that fantasy. It wasn't until I started working in theater in the Atlanta area and I was always pretty precocious and relatively mature for my age. So I usually had older friends. So I was able to like see how they did things and be exposed to their world a little bit more. So it wasn't until then that I had like the desire to do that kind of stuff was even open to me, because prior to that, I had no idea that how anything like that was made. It's like wanting to be an astronaut. It's like, yeah, that'd be cool, but I don't even know where to start. Which I still want to do that. So we'll see.
Well, as a puppeteer or a theater person, you can be anything. It's just right in your
yes,
mind.
That's true. That's very
on
true.
Screen. I'm not a doctor, but I play. Yeah. So you were doing theater as a kid? Like, did you go to school for theater? Did you go to college to do anything, or did you just go straight into puppeteering and filmmaking?
So I did some theater in my smaller homeschool group, but it was just that small and homeschooled. The main creative outlet that I had was performing with my family, even though I don't think they would never call themselves artists or like being creatives in that space. It was very much about the church and the ministry and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not a part of that world anymore, but it was an outlet for my own creative engine. When I graduated high school, I did an internship at the center, and then I started going to Georgia State University in the film department. Actually, I started in the theater department, but then, as I was signing up, they discontinued the theater department. So I was like, oh well, I guess I could just do film. I like movies, so. I transitioned into the film department, and I actually am about 13 credits away from graduating because I dropped out because I got to work on a Nickelodeon show called Lazy Town. That's a Nick Jr. show that was actually shooting in Iceland. So my first time on a professional set was in Iceland. Which was pretty crazy. So yeah,
Was that in Reykjavik?
Yeah. Well, I was living in Reykjavik, but we were just outside of Reykjavik, in a small suburb, like an industrial suburb called Galdabæjar. I think that was the name of it. But yeah.
Okay. I was just curious. I've been there twice, so
okay. Yeah, we were just outside of Reykjavik. But I lived in Reykjavik most of the time. So yeah, I was planning on being there for like about 2 months, and then the production basically got stretched out to a year. So I spent about a year in Iceland working on that show. And then once I came back to Atlanta, I just kept working in the film industry and didn't go back to college. So, but honestly, the biggest value that my time at State allotted me was the fact that I was able to rent a bunch of equipment. You know, they had this camera equipment and video editing booths that you could use, and as long as you returned it, you could pretty much rent it to shoot anything over the course of a couple of days. So there was an organization with the theater in Decatur called Push Push Theater. It's a legendary theater. It's still around now, but they are doing slightly other things. They had this organization called the Dailies Project, which was really amazing. It was basically this program where, because Push Push was a workshop theater, we had a bunch of actors. Some kids came in and were like, hey, we want to make some movies. Can we work together? And so the artistic director basically made this collective where these young people with cameras and some editing equipment were able to set up auditions and workshop scripts and basically cast from the pool of actors who just wanted roles in anything. And it became a little more formalized, where we would have like challenges where everybody would have to make a film based on this one picture, or everybody would have to make a film based on a fight scene, or these challenges that we would take. And it was kind of like a 48-hour film festival, but it was longer. So it's usually like 3 to 6 months would be one challenge, and there'd be different criteria for it. And we'd come back with like workshopping our scripts. And then we would come back and show our rough cuts, and then we'd have a big screening at the end of it. So it was very much we called it a safe place to fail. And out of that, that's actually how I met Hannah Fierman. That's how she got involved in the film industry in Atlanta. One of my best friends met a guy named David Bruckner, who directed a movie called The Signal and The Ritual, and a lot of other really great movies. He also did the new Hellraiser movie as well. Dan Bush, who's a great director, he does a lot of podcasts, narrative podcasts as well. So yeah, some really awesome artists came out of Dailies back in the day. So that was really my education, was the Dailies Project.
Do you think that putting all that time into the film paid off with your puppetry work as well? Because I guess now, having done all the behind the scenes stuff on film, you kind of maybe speak the language of the crew so much. So if you're on camera as a puppeteer, now you can kind of work with that crew a little easier. Is that the case, or is it?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we were talking off camera about my more recent project, Eric, on Netflix. It stars Benedict Cumberbatch, who plays a puppeteer. So I was the puppet captain on that, which means that I trained Benedict Cumberbatch to be a puppeteer, as well as the rest of the cast. I mean, yeah, the rest of the cast who are actors playing puppeteers. So in addition to that, I was a liaison between the art department and camera, because the show takes place in the 1980s. And it was a British production company too. So, like, children's television is a little different in the UK and Europe in general. And this show is based on American children's television. So I had to be a liaison between all the departments that were going to be involved. So yes, definitely the fact that I have done so many jobs on set allowed me to liaise between all the departments. In addition to that, as a director, I was directing the second unit, some of the second unit shoots, because they had all this stuff where Benedict's character is a puppeteer, but that's not the main point of the show. So like a lot of the B-roll that you see of like the puppets interacting on camera behind the scenes or on a TV screen, if you don't see an actor's face, I directed some of that stuff, the puppets. So when they hired me, I was able to basically be this Swiss Army knife of puppetry and to all these different departments. In addition to that, like, it's helped me, appreciate the different departments in different ways. And I think that if anybody is trying to become a director, I always emphasize that they have to work in as many different departments as possible, just so that they can appreciate what these people are doing and the time it takes to do these things, so that when you are frustrated with something taking too long or not understanding, you can speak intelligently to the process. And it's not just this abstract thing, because you can go your entire career without understanding what a second AD does, or a props assist or a gaffer does. And that can get you in trouble if you're trying to make sure that everybody is on the same page at all times when you're directing.
I love hearing about the behind the scenes of this from you, and all the different purposes you served on that set. Was it nerve-wracking being on set the first day? Because I've been on set for so long, I certainly feel a lot more comfortable. It was a little like being able to interact with Benedict Cumberbatch for the first time was a little intimidating. Our first interactions were over Zoom, just because I wanted to make sure that they had a foundation of puppetry before we got on set. So I gave them just some exercises and stuff to do physically, so they can get it into their muscle memory, like lip synchronization and eye focus and just little character stuff that they could play around with. But yeah, it was to a certain extent, because Ben particularly, he had a very difficult job. If you watch the show, he is playing a puppeteer, and he has this added level of challenge that I don't have when I puppeteer, which is you don't see my face. And there are scenes where he is acting with his face while puppeteering. He's giving a look to another character and frowning or making some sort of inclination about what the subtext of that scene is, all while puppeteering. So when there was times when I had to, he was performing and he had a dialect coach come in, because they're supposed to be in 1980s New York, and he has a very specific American accent. And then they'd have the script supervisor who came in and we'd give him a note about a line that he kind of tweaked or missed or something like that. And then I'd have to come in and give him a note about his puppetry. So, and he was incredibly gracious. He's a really, really great guy. And I had a great time working with him. But to that end, it was still I felt bad for him just with all these bombarding of notes. But he took everything with strides, and he did a great job. Sounds a little bit like being a one-man band. Like you got the feet and the whistle with
you got
the
the
thing
harmonica up here, and then you got you maybe strumming the guitar, and then you're using your knees for the cymbals, and
Mozart. I also wanted to ask you, because you've done so much with the Puppetry Center, and I know from my own experience, I've seen a ton of different types of puppetry, and I've been to the Puppetry Center and seen the whole world history of puppetry side and then this other stuff. Do you have a favorite form of puppetry? Because, there's the shadow puppetry and I saw the experimental puppetry show this year because Frances was on our show not that long ago, and she's sort of
Frances Chang, for if you didn't.
Yeah. And she's sort of a neighbor-ish of mine over here in the Old Fourth Ward area. So I saw the experimental puppetry show, and there were so many different types of puppetry going on, and maybe not even all the ones that would represent everything that's out there. So I'm curious if you have a particular type that you prefer, or
I do. I think that I'm most proficient in what we call Muppet style hand and rod puppets. And that's just, you have your hand inside of the puppet moving the mouth, and then you have your other hand operating the rods, or if it is like a Cookie Monster, Swedish Chef style puppet, you have your physical hand operating the hands and somebody else assisting you. So I certainly am most proficient in that, but my favorite style is what we refer to as tabletop or bunraku style puppetry, which is one puppet standing full body, and three different puppeteers operating that one puppet. And it's, when it works really well, it's pretty amazing and very seamless, and it becomes this beautiful Zen-like experience working with other puppeteers who you're not talking to, but you're communicating to make this one central character come to life. And that, like, that style of puppetry is inspired by a style of Japanese puppetry called bunraku, which is a bunraku theater, and they've been around for hundreds of years. And it's a style that, like, they spend a decade on a puppet just operating that one hand before you can operate a head of the puppet. So, like, they're, like many things in Japanese culture, they're very much about the perfection of the art form. And so seeing it is truly amazing when you can. But we also use it a lot in television as well. So if you ever see a puppet on the Muppets or Sesame Street, and you see their legs, their full body, and they're dancing or what have you, that is how we operate it. We have three puppeteers all in green suits. And they're one's operating the feet, one's operating the body and one arm, and the other one's operating the other arm and the head. And you have to figure out dance choreography and walking and jumping and all this kind of stuff. And it's a really special process, and I love it.
Like, I'm curious to know, like, what is usually like the reaction, I guess, when you tell people that you're a puppeteer versus like before you explain it to them versus like after? Because I'm sure like a lot of people who aren't like really big on like going behind the scenes of movies and TV probably hear like puppets and they're probably going, wait, you do what? And then I'm sure after you explain it, it's probably like, oh, like, yeah, it's like the shutter doors open wide up. Like, yeah. So like, I'm just curious to know like how you deal with, I'm sure, like people's perception of you as a puppeteer, and then explain to them the reality of a puppeteer.
Yeah. You know, it really depends on my mood. Because if you say straight up that you're a puppeteer, that's like, you're just going to get a bunch of questions. And it's a bunch of questions you've been asked a million times. And like, I just have to depend. All right, do I really want to spend the next 10 minutes talking to this person about all the questions that I get all the time? But I'm not saying that to be like rude or anything like that. But it can be kind of tiring. But yeah, I mean, I usually say that, honestly, but I also do so many things. So I'll say that I'm a freelance artist, and then they'll be like, oh, what does that mean? Well, I'm an independent filmmaker and a puppeteer with the Jim Henson Company. I usually add that to add some sort of gravitas, so they know that I'm not just like in, you know, parks and libraries doing that kind of thing, which there's nothing wrong with that. I have friends that do that kind of thing, but that's just not what I do. So if I say I'm a Jim Henson puppeteer, that usually they at least get the idea of a Muppet style puppet in their head.
Because I'm sure anyone old enough, do you just say Jim Henson, suddenly, you know, a lot more lights come on inside the house, and then they're like, oh, Muppets, Fraggle Rock, yeah, you know, and whatever else you associate with that.
And then you're less likely to get the, hey, can you do my kid's birthday party?
Yes. That's really the reason why I have to be careful what I say, because look, I'm sure your kid's great, but I can't. I honestly, like, I've never really.
That's when you'd be like, you can't afford me.
I played Elmo at a kid's birthday party. You don't want to go there. Trust me. Don't do it.
Yeah, no, I've never done, believe it or not, I've never done a kid's birthday party. I need something. I definitively need that thing between me and the audience to protect me, because I still am a pretty shy person in real life. So I don't really like interacting with people on a performance level in real time. Like, yeah, when I perform on stage, it's generally with a puppet. So you're never really seeing me.
Well, the good thing about being Elmo at a kid's birthday party, they don't see you. And also, you're not supposed to talk when you're a costume character generally. So you don't have to say anything. You're just like, you
Yeah.
know.
But then
But,
they just
yeah, it's
stomp
overrated.
on your feet and try and punch and kick you. So
Didn't happen to me, but what
all
what
right.
did happen is the dad had rented a Cookie Monster costume from a low budget place. And so my costume and his looked very different, and he came out in the Cookie Monster costume, and the kid started crying, and he had to take the kid aside and be like, "It's just me, it's me in here," because the
That's
kid was
great.
screaming because it was terrifying. I mean, I was scared of his costume. That's how bad it was. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Note to parents out there.
Spend the extra money on the good costume.
Yeah.
Yes,
Unless you want to, pay for your kids' therapy afterwards.
for sure.
So I want to get back into like the filmmaking side of it some more. Like you did a short film a few years back called Joyriders, which I really liked. And it especially because it kind of reminded me of some of that old classic 80s sci-fi, like particularly was Flight of the Navigator. Was what immediately jumped to mind. If for anyone who's old enough to know that, and if you aren't old enough, go find that movie. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's on. They're all on Disney Plus right now. So
yeah, like what? As far as like what is for when you're going out there and doing your own stuff, like I'm just guessing, like what are the kind of things you want to? Are you wanting to do more stuff like that? Because I think I spoke to you back in the day when you were kind of, I think when Joyriders was first coming out, and I know you had mentioned the idea of wanting to turn it into like a feature.
yeah, no. So Joyriders is still something that I'm very passionate about, and you're right. It is very inspired by movies like Flight of the Navigator, Last Starfighter, E.T., that kind of stuff from that classic era of the 80s science fiction, particularly with practical effects. So we did a crowdfunding thing for it and raised over $20,000. We had about 200 people donate for that. And then a lot of people also volunteer their time to help with the film throughout the process. I built a spaceship, a Bigature spaceship that was about 2 feet by a foot tall, that lit up and all that kind of stuff. And we had a motion control camera that was donated to us to basically shoot the movement of the ship flying through Atlanta practically. And the premise of the movie is that it's 3 kids from the inner cities of Atlanta find an alien spaceship and accidentally download its consciousness, as you do, and then instantly know how to fly the spaceship. And they decide to take it on a joyride around the city. And we had ironically enough, we were one of the few people that benefited from the early lockdowns of 2020 because we had to shoot all this footage of the spaceship flying through Atlanta that we were going to comp the practical ship on top of. And so during the height of the lockdown, me and my DP and one other person got a drone and went out into the ghost town that was Atlanta at the time and flew our drone in spaces that we would not have been able to fly it had there been thousands of people on the streets, which it normally was. So that was a pretty cool experience. So yeah, I mean, Joyriders is now on Roku TV. It did the film festival, the circuit, and won some awards. And that's how it got on Roku. And we've had some meetings and stuff. And I've kind of had a whole host of different iterations of it. Everything from an animated series to a live action series, an adult series, a kid series, and also a featured process. So it's still in the work. I mean, obviously, the pandemic and the strikes and everything else that is the volatility of the industry has not been kind to us, but it's still something that I'm passionate about making into something more. It did benefit me because that's how I was able to direct some new episodes of the new Yo Gabba Gabba Land series. If you remember Yo Gabba Gabba from back in the day, it's coming back on Apple TV. It's one of those crazy things where I had a film festival in LA, and I went out there and I was posting about it on social media, and a producer friend of mine showed up to it, a pretty big time producer, and I was like, "What are you doing here?" And she was like, "Oh, I saw you posting on social media, and I wanted to see it." So she saw it, and then because of that, she saw that film. She invited me to direct a couple of episodes of the new Yo Gabba Gabba series. So all that to say, you never know what your short films will lead to. So there is value to all of them.
So it sounds like your journey through this. I mean, the way you talk about it, it sounds like you've sort of fallen from one thing to the next. Maybe that's not the case. Was there ever a time in this journey that you really haven't known what the next step was, or you weren't sure, how to leverage where you were to where you wanted to be? And what did you do with that?
The answer is yes, and constantly. The progress is never inevitable, particularly for anyone that you see that has had some levels of success. There wasn't, particularly for the creative industry. If you work a 9 to 5, if you're an accountant and you've worked at the same firm, you know your trajectory and you know where you can go. And it's a pretty straight line. And as a creative in this industry, in any kind of industry, as a creative, it's rare that there is a straight line to do what you want to do. So especially as a freelancer, you oftentimes have to gamify your career and take big swings. And honestly, you have to, as cliche as it sounds, you have to invest and bet on yourself. So oftentimes, for better or worse, my priority was my own creative passions. Like there's been plenty of times where I could have, bought a new car or put a down payment on the house or do all this kind of stuff. And instead, I just decided to invest that money into a new short film or a new theater piece or any kind of other creative process. So any success that I've had has been based on a flagrant disregard for my own financial security. So it's hard for me to really, I'm sure there are smarter and easier and better ways to have a career in the creative space, but I'm not smart enough to do it that way. So yeah, I mean, look, as you get older, the chances that you can take become more difficult to do because you've had the battle scars of the failures that you've experienced, and you know that maybe I don't want to put myself out there because it might sucks really hard. When you're younger, you don't really have that history of knowing what it means to just fall flat on your face like that. So if there's anybody younger, I think you gotta you can be more stable and secure when you're older. You gotta swing for the fences while you still can, while you don't have the weight of the financial world on your shoulders. So yeah, it is this thing where I very rarely knew what was next, even to this day. But there's a level of being almost fooling yourself into your own confidence, because I'm not an extraordinarily confident person. At this point, this is just all I know how to do, is just keep taking the chances, taking the opportunities that come my way, and hoping for the next one around, and also not building my life to the point where I need to have an exorbitant amount of money coming in my life every month just to survive. I still live pretty lean. And that enables me to do the things that I do when I can.
You know what? I thank you for saying that right now, because I feel like that is the message I needed to hear today. about the taking big swings thing, and I'm not even joking. Like I'm debating something right now over the last like 2 days, and so I'm just like, yeah, I kind of needed to hear that. Or and you already gave advice for younger people coming up. I wanted to know from you though, like, what would you say the biggest swing you've ever taken was, where you were like, I don't know if this is the right thing to do. I might be screwing myself up here, but I'm gonna go for it.
Um, that's a good question. The biggest swing I took, it's all relative, because they seem, a lot of times it seems big in the moment, and then in hindsight, when everything is fine, you're just like, yeah, whatever, that was fine. So it also sometimes it seems more obvious than others. So I guess Joyriders was a pretty big swing because I didn't really know where the money was going to come from. I didn't know if people were going to be supporting it as much as I did, and it was pretty exhausting just to like be out there, raising that money. And then once we raised the money, having to actually shoot it took us about 10 days to shoot over the course of several different production chunks. And like I said, there were hundreds of people that were involved in that whole project. And it was all that was like literally me. Like I wrote the thing and I directed it. And so it's weird to rely on your own sense of ego, which I don't feel that is a major part of me. I wouldn't say that I am an egotistical person. In fact, I think I'm oftentimes quite self-loathing. So the idea was like, okay, well, this is my idea, and I sure hope other people give a care about it. But I think kind of to piggyback onto any kind of lessons that I've learned is that we live in a world where everyone's taste is accounted for now. There was a time when you had to really make a project and make it for the masses. You had to make it to make sure that everyone was going to like it. And now there are so many different niches that word doesn't even mean anything anymore. There's something for everyone. So if you do have something that you're passionate about, you can take it to the next level and just know that somebody out there will be as passionate about it as you are. You will find your audience. And that is a rarity that has not existed in human existence, in my opinion, prior to these moments, because you literally, like, I have fans around the world. I mean, you guys have fans around the world, even if you don't know it, like just from social media. So it's a truly special time. And yeah, you may not have everyone knocking on your door. You may not get recognized in the streets, but there are folks out there who want to hear what you have to say and want to see what you have to produce. And that enables a level of community that was very hard to have in the past. And I think that having a community is about just the best commodity you can hope for in this industry.
I have one more quick question before we kind of wrap it up. I'm curious there seems to be a thing in Hollywood lately that I think it's just a revolt to or like a very light revolt to a lot of the CGI that's kind of besieged us in the last 20 years. That people are starting to kind of lean, like you got people like Christopher Nolan and some other people who are kind of wanting to lean more back towards the practical side of effects. Do you feel like that's something that maybe like puppetry? Because I'm not on the inside of the industry like you are. Do you feel like that's maybe kind of an opportunity for people like yourself to kind of get back there and kind of work on all the practical side of like the movie magic I don't know, like, how do you see, like, as far as just the immediate future of that field being where you are?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that most of the time when I do puppetry, it is not Muppety style. It is more practical effects. Like I do the Aflac duck for social media, and that's a practical creature effects puppet. Working with the Henson Company, we do all kinds of different creature effects stuff. And sometimes that is less about like a monster, and sometimes it's about an object that's being moved around or what have you, which is still considered puppetry, even according to SAG. So I think that there is, yes, puppetry is still thriving, particularly in the creature effects space. The Star Warses and the Marvel elements, like they all have some element of puppetry involved in them, and that is a reaction to the fact that with CG we've reached the uncanny valley, and we know as close as we can get to computer generated characters, and the novelty has worn off, and there is a level of desire to have the textile nature that puppetry offers, not only just for the visual, but also for the performers, the actors. They want to be able to, they know, the productions know that they'll get a better performance from their actors if they have something tangible for the actors to interact with. And so I think that it's going to, and it has been, it's becoming this blend. And oftentimes just because we are a competitive culture, we try and say CG or puppetry, but it's never that anymore. It's always a combination. There's a creature effect, a puppet that has some sort of CG element to it that makes the character blink or have a little more wetness to its mouth, or maybe just has the character move its mouth a little bit more fluidly than you would with a traditional puppet. There are CG characters that are their movement are based on physical puppets that a puppeteer is moving around, particularly stuff like with the Jungle Book, that mostly CG movie had a child in it, and there were puppets interacting with the child, and then they CG'd on top of them. So it's always going to be some element of the two moving forward, and we'll see where AI starts to play into this nonsense, but that's a whole different thing.
I'm just saying, based on some of the stuff I'm seeing out there, your job should be safe for a while, because I've seen some that were really good, but you're talking about like the absolute bleeding edge of what it can do with people who have like access and money. But then I've seen like a whole bunch of other stuff that you're going like, yeah, it shouldn't be a threat anytime soon. So, yeah. I mean, this has been great. We could talk. I'm sure both Billy and myself could, draw this conversation out for another couple of hours, because this is always fascinating stuff.
You had me at homeschooled by church clowns.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like that. I mean, dude, I feel like that's a movie in and of itself. If you're ever willing to go back there, I feel like that's just a script waiting to be written.
We actually had a development deal with a company to do a series for a while, my brother and I. We'll see if it ever goes anywhere.
So tell the people where they can find you online if they want to look you up or at you in any way.
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram with The Ninja Puppet. You can find me online. My website is ninjapuppetproductions.com. You can check out Eric on Netflix right now, starring Benedict Cumberbatch. And you can also look for the new Yo Gabba Gabba Land series on Apple TV. In addition, next year I will be, there'll be an exhibit about me at the Center for Puppetry Arts, actually, a part of their Puppetry Now program. So from January through April, in their special exhibit gallery, they will have my work of my career. So it's an 800 square foot gallery, which is about the size of my first apartment. So it's kind of surreal to be there. So it's going to be my work there. And then I'll be doing a series of shows of original pieces there in July, which is going to be called the Ninja Puppet Shenaniganza. So that's going to be a fun experience too. So, but all that stuff you can find on ninjapuppetproductions.com or following me online. So.
Awesome. Nice. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Thank you. This was great. That will be all for this episode. To keep up with the show, follow us on social media at Scratch Claw Push. If social media isn't your thing, you can contact us at scratchclawpush@gmail.com. To learn more about the show, visit scratchclawpush.com. This podcast has been a Carcutta Media production. This recording, or any portion thereof, may not be reproduced or used in any manner whatsoever without the express written permission of the publisher, except for the use of brief quotations in a review. Copyright 2024 by Carcutta Media, LLC, all rights reserved.